What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. One of the biggest advantages of a fully digital card game like Hearthstone is that Blizzard can change already released cards however they want, whenever they want, versus something like a physical card game where it's a little bit difficult and oftentimes they're limited to just banning or restricting already printed cards. Although Blizzard has this powerful tool at their disposal, they actually don't use it all that often, mostly because they don't really want to change too many cards and potentially risk upsetting the player base. Still though, when Blizzard changes something, it's usually for a good reason, like a card often being way too broken. So today we're taking a look back and talking about the top 10 biggest nerfs to cards in Hearthstone history. And if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and let's begin. So before we get into the actual top 10, there's a couple of honorable mentions that we still wanted to touch up on briefly just because they were nerfs that we still wanted to include on the list, we just didn't really have space for them. So first up we have the nerf to Blade Flurry. So Blade Flurry used to cost 2 mana and deal its damage to both heroes and minions, which made it both Rogue's best AoE board clear and a powerful burst damage tool. However, Blizzard decided that Blade Flurry was simply too strong and changed it into costing 4 mana and also only dealing damage to minions. And this nerf was honestly huge since it made one of Rogue's best cards completely unplayable and knocked the class down a lot of spots on the tier list. There's quite a lot of outcry over this nerf honestly, since while the old Blade Flurry was good, a lot argued that it was maybe not actually that broken in the first place. Maybe it was fair and balanced in some situations at least, but Blade Flurry definitely deserves an honorable mention for the list. Our next honorable mention is actually Tinkmaster. Tinkmaster Overspark is an awesome card, although probably one that you don't see a ton on ladder anymore, but the old version of Tinkmaster Overspark actually used to be pretty overpowered. So the old version had 1 point less of stats as a 2/2 creature, but its effect was really awesome. You know, it was the same as the current effect, except you would pick the target that got randomly transformed. And this was actually pretty insane if you think about it, because you could target things like Tyrion, Sylvanas, Ragnaros, and worst case you still silence them and turn them into a 5/5, and best case scenario it's a polymorph. Tinkmaster being able to target any creature was probably one of the more overpowered things in the game, since it was just pretty much a 3 mana polymorph on a stick, and he was changed into his current version during the open beta. So first up on our actual list at number 10 we have Illidan Stormrage. So the original version of this card was actually a 7 mana 7/7 creature that made both players discard 3 cards and then draw 3 cards. Now this would actually be just insanely broken in today's meta for quite a few reasons. You know, first up, it has great synergy with a lot of the discard themed Warlock cards, stuff like Malchazar's Imp, Silverware Golem, even Fist of Jaraxxus. Secondly, if you personally would have no cards in hand when you cast Illidan, or if you had less than 3 cards, he essentially just draws you a bunch of cards for free. And thirdly, which is the main reason why this guy would be super insane, if your opponent is playing a combo deck or a deck that really needs some specific cards like maybe Reno Lock or something like that, this would just completely wreck your opponent's game plan. So this version of Illidan was actually just insane and probably would see play in a ridiculous amount of decks today. Unfortunately, Blizzard decided that they didn't want this version of Illidan, probably because it messed with the opponent's hand and resources too much, and they didn't really like making discarding cards from your opponent's hand as a mechanic, so they changed him into a 7 mana 7/6 at the time that summons Flames of Azzinoth when he casts spells, and then they later nerfed him again to have only 5 health in another alpha patch. Unfortunately, the current version of Illidan is pretty much unplayable these days, so it was definitely a massive nerf. Illidan went from being a cool card with a variety of uses to pretty much just being a worse hogger, so the changes definitely earn him a spot on the list. Next up on the list we have Molten Giant, with the relevant nerf being its changing of the mana cost from 20 to 25. And this nerf's actually a little bit different from some of the other cards on this list, since Molten Giant was never entirely all that broken, or oppressive at least, and there's kind of been a lot of backlash over the nerf since. Still though, it's definitely one of the biggest nerfs ever, because the old Molten Giant was just a staple in Handlock and Reno Lock variants, and the 25 mana version has seen almost no play whatsoever. Being in the 10 to 20 total life range to get free or cheap Molten Giants was a reasonable trade-off, but being in the 5 to 10 total life range is just asking way too much, especially with pretty much every class having access to quite a lot of burst when they need it. Having to be at 5 life or lower completely kills Molten Giant's viability in Standard and Wild, and the nerf honestly pretty much killed the entire Handlock deck in favor of Reno Lock, so as a result it definitely earns a spot as one of the biggest nerfs in Hearthstone history. Next up we have Force of Nature at number 8. Force of Nature originally red summoned 3 2/2 Trents with charge that die at the end of the turn, and this was changed to pretty much unplayable garbage. And this is definitely one of the most influential nerfs of all time, since it single-handedly destroyed the combo druid deck completely, which was probably the best deck in the game at the time, and it forced druid to have to explore other archetypes. Force of Nature was honestly just ridiculously powerful when comboed with Savage Roar, and it pretty much let druid players deal lethal damage to you from completely out of nowhere. What was really broken, however, though, was that druid, they had tons of really good mid-range and card draw options, so you would be able to play a 2-card combo that usually just won the game pretty much without having to actually sacrifice anything in your actual deck building. For example, when you would build Malagos decks, you would need to include tons of card draw, tons of spells, ways to reduce the costs on things like Thorazin, so that you can kill your opponent in one turn, and all combo druid needed was to stick Force and Roar into pretty much any deck with minions and they were good to go. And this nerf to Force of Nature pretty much changed the way druid plays as a class forever, so it's definitely earning a spot on our list. Up next we have the nerf to Blood Imp. So the original version of this card was a 1 mana 1/1 that had the text of Stealth, your other minions have +1 health. And this was honestly just an insane effect to have in the Zoo Warlock deck, as well as in the Murloc Warlock decks, since Blood Imp was hard to kill without Area of Effect, and it also made Area of Effect much worse since it buffed all of the other minions' health, right? In addition, of course, you could also suddenly just make a bunch of favorable trades by playing 1, or if you happen to get lucky, 2 Blood Imps, and letting all your minions survive trades that the opponents just wouldn't expect them to. What's more, the additional point of attack was actually sometimes relevant too, since it let Blood Imp get some hits in, or allowed it to make some trades on the board sometimes. Ultimately, this version of Blood Imp was just way too strong and made Zoo Warlock decks just unreasonable to deal with back in the day, and as well it made Murloc Warlock decks probably one of the best decks in the game at the time. And so of course Blizzard nerfed it into the 0/1 minion that buffs a minion's health for 1 at the end of the turn, resulting in a pretty much unplayable version and killing the Murloc Warlock archetype completely. Still though, the Blood Imp was also an incredible force in Zoo Warlock as well, and definitely earns a spot on our list as one of the biggest nerfs of all time. Up next at number 6 we have the nerf to Warsong Commander, which was pretty similar to the nerf to Force of Nature. It was a completely broken charge card that was made into just unplayable garbage. Together with Grim Patron and Frothing Berserker, the old version of Warsong Commander, which gave minions with less than 3 attack charge, was potentially one of the most broken cards in the game. It wasn't really difficult at all to OTK your opponent at 8 or 9 mana, even more so if you got a good Thorazin activation, and it was also incredibly easy to clear your opponent's board and make a complete board full of patrons all in one turn. The original idea with Warsong Commander was that giving minions with 3 or less attack would maybe keep the card balanced, but unfortunately Grim Patron and Frothing Berserker kinda just cheated out this system altogether. Patron because of course it makes a million copies of itself, and Frothing Berserker because, well, it's not exactly a minion with less than 3 attack once you finally swing with it. The minions with less than 3 attack part was actually a nerf to the original version of Warsong Commander, which gave everything charge, and this enabled crazy combo decks like Molten Giant OTK that charged in free Molten Giants and then returned them to the hand so you could attack with them again. Either way though, both versions, both nerfs to Warsong Commander were quite large. Definitely not surprising though that she got nerfed heavily twice now and is pretty much unplayable. Next up on our list at number 5, we have the nerf to Starving Buzzard, or more specifically the fact that this card used to cost 2 mana and now costs 5 mana instead. And as for why this card needed such a ridiculous nerf, well, 2 mana Starving Buzzard existed at the same time as 2 mana Unleash the Hounds actually. This meant that whenever your opponent overextended on board, for only 4 mana you would get a bunch of Hounds and to draw a million cards too. And in the million cards that you drew, you probably had a Timberwolf or something else to buff your Hounds more, meaning the nightmare pretty much never ended for your opponent and you would just draw your entire deck. Starving Buzzard at 2 mana was just a ridiculous engine card, even better than Auctioneer and Miracle Rogue, or anything really that we've ever seen, and it just let the deck do insanely powerful things, and so Blizzard decided that it needed a really strong nerf. Up next on the list at number 4, we have the nerf to charge. And oh man, this card was honestly just completely broken in its first couple versions. It's probably a card that none of you guys actually have played before ever. So when charge was first added into the game, it had the effect of costing 0 mana and would give your minions charge this turn. You know, we've already talked about Warsong and why giving things charge can be OP, and this card gave all of your minions charge for 0 mana. You know, imagine how many different and just ridiculous OTKs could exist in the current version of Hearthstone if that version of charge was kept the same. Charge was changed to just letting a single minion gain charge in the alpha phase, which nerfed it quite a lot, but still left it as a pretty solid tool to enable some combos. And in the closed beta, charge was again nerfed, with its mana cost being increased to 3, and it now giving 2 attack to the minion that it targeted. Unfortunately, this was also still too overpowered, at least according to Blizzard, and quite recently it was nerfed a third time, making it a 1 mana spell with the text of giving a friendly minion charge, but with the caveat that it cannot attack heroes this turn, which sort of does kind of defeat the whole point since the card was always primarily used as a way to get some burst damage on your opponent's face. Still though, charge was just so overpowered that it got nerfed 3 times, and that one particular nerf back in the alpha definitely deserves a spot on the list. Up next at number 3, we have the nerf to Unleash the Hounds. Much like Warsong Commander, our next card on our list was nerfed multiple times as well. And so the first iteration of Unleash the Hounds was originally a 1 mana spell to give all of your beasts +1 attack and charge. And of course, as many of you guys can imagine, this led to just a ridiculous amount of OTKs and just general disgusting brokenness, since you could play a bunch of beasts, make them all big, give them charge, and just go face with everything. So Blizzard changed it in the closed beta and made it summon a hound for each minion that the opponent played, as well as changing the cost to 4 mana. And Blizzard later decided that the 4 mana cost was actually a little bit too much, so they buffed the card to cost 2 mana, and later on decided that that was a little bit overpowered, and so Unleash was again nerfed to cost 3 mana total. And up next, we have the nerf to Savagery at number 2. So the reason Savagery back in the day was so insane was that essentially it used to have the same effect as the old pre-nerf Blade Flurry, where it would just deal damage equal to your hero's attack to all enemy minions. Druid could just play things like Claw and Bite and have outrageous AoE board clears, which is why Savagery was nerfed to just having a single target in the closed beta. And it's a really good thing that it was nerfed too, otherwise Druids would have had better board clears than any other class, and that is just insane in a class that already has ramp, already has all these solid minions and stuff like that. You know, there's pretty much no room in Druid for a while to play anything other than the spell Druid archetype that relied heavily on the Savagery clears and face damage, and so this nerf definitely helped expand the class's horizon a ton while also killing the archetype at the time. And bringing home the number 1 spot as the biggest nerf in Hearthstone history, we have the nerf, of course, to Undertaker. Undertaker was definitely in contention for one of the best cards in the game at the time, and it used to gain +1/+1 for every Death Rattle minion you would play. Unfortunately, Undertaker was just way too good to be true, and it was nerfed and has seen completely no play since, but at the time Undertaker was good. It was honestly just insane and completely defined the entire meta. Having a 1-drop that could quickly become a 4/5 minion or larger with barely any cost whatsoever was honestly just so amazing. Pretty much all you had to do was just play Death Rattle minions in your deck, which was incredibly easy for an aggressive Hunter deck, an aggressive Warlock deck, an aggressive Priest decks, all sorts of stuff. Especially back when Haunted Creeper was in Standard and Leper Gnome hadn't been nerfed either. Pretty much every game of Hearthstone at this point in time was decided by who would get their Undertaker bigger faster, or whether or not your opponent could kill your Undertaker in time. Every deck at the time was either an Undertaker deck or a deck metagaming against Undertaker decks with a ton of early game removal to stop Undertaker openings. And still though, Undertaker dominated the meta completely, like pretty much no card in Hearthstone ever has to this day. And a 1 mana card that dominates the meta is a lot scarier than 7 mana cards like Dr. Boom, because you just have to deal with them as soon as the game starts, and they often just end up completely deciding the game. Undertaker's nerf literally made Hearthstone a completely different game, which is honestly just insane and definitely earns the spot as the number 1 biggest nerf to ever take place in Hearthstone history. Either way though, it looks like that's going to be it for the list, so if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, subscribe if you want. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.